Internet's darkest corners, when technology exposes real-life tragedies. Welcome to Dark True Stories. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the most mysterious and terrifying stories from around the world. Today, I'm taking you deep into the darkest corners of the internet, where technology doesn't just connect people, but also inadvertently becomes a witness to the most heartbreaking tragedies. These are real stories, final moments captured on camera, and mysteries that sent chills down the world's spine. The live stream of life and death, the Charlotte tragedy. On May 18, 2024, residents of Charlotte, North Carolina woke up to the sight and smell of black smoke billowing into the sky. The source was a massive 7-story apartment complex housing 239 luxury units, or what should have been luxury units. The deadly trap. The building under construction created two serious problems. First, the top 5 floors were primarily just wooden frames and insulation, turning the entire structure into a giant tinderbox waiting to ignite. Second, 17 construction workers had clocked in that morning and were now all in grave danger. When firefighters arrived on scene, the situation was already dire. They rushed in and rescued 15 workers, but then realized a horrifying truth. 2 men were still missing. Somewhere in that labyrinth of burning wooden walls, 2 men were trapped and calling for help. Desperation broadcast live. That's when Demont Sherrill, 30 years old, did something no one could have anticipated. He pulled out his phone, opened Facebook, and started live streaming, letting the entire world witness the horrifying reality he and his friend Reuben Holmes were facing. "I'm at South Park right now at work in a building on fire, and I can't get out." The livestream showed 2 men somewhere deep within the apartment complex. Though fire hadn't reached them yet, smoke had blanketing them in thick, impenetrable fog that made breathing extremely difficult and made it nearly impossible for rescuers to see them. "It's getting harder and harder for them to see us. We're trapped in here, me and my man." The impossible rescue. They were on the 6th floor, the second highest level, with only one exit, a single stairway on the complete opposite side of the building. Based on their testimony in the footage, something had clearly blocked their path to that lone exit. The only other option was to jump, but at 6 stories high and falling into what would likely be the heart of the fire, this meant certain death. Rescuers were aware of the unfolding situation on the 6th story. They first tried to reach the men using a massive crane with an attached basket, which can actually be seen in Demont's live stream. However, it was facing completely the wrong direction because the smoke was that impenetrable. This left only one real option for saving Demont and Reuben. They would have to go in after them. Firefighters climbed the stairway to the 6th floor and began their trek to the opposite end of the structure. The desperate evacuation order. But before they could make it halfway, the rescuers were forced to crawl slowly as the inferno around them raged more intensely and smoke grew thicker. That's when they began to hear screaming. Somewhere lost in that maze, Reuben and Demont were yelling as loud as they could for help. This sound was a sign they were getting close. But just then, rescuers were met with another sound. "All companies working 7741 Liberty Road Drive, evacuate structure per command. Be ready for this side to collapse. Everybody get out of the collapse zone." The order was given for all of them to evacuate as the structure was now engulfed in flames, and collapse was imminent. The firefighters tried to call out to the 2 men in one last attempt to guide them toward rescue, but they never came. The heartbreaking end. The live stream abruptly ended. Minutes later, fire consumed the entire building with temperatures inside reaching 2,000 degrees F before it collapsed. Inside, Demont and Reuben became the sole fatalities of this catastrophe. What's most heartbreaking about this live stream is that most of those who initially watched were his own friends and family following him on Facebook, including his own mother. Many probably had no idea he even worked this job since he'd only been hired that week. His brother also caught the stream as it was happening and actually rushed to the scene, where he pleaded with firefighters to watch the footage. The mystery recording, Johnny Cashman's death. The alarming call. Johnny Cashman spoke to his family nearly every single day. But now, on the sixth day without receiving any communication from him, they knew something was wrong. Johnny lived in Lynchburg, Virginia, hundreds of miles from his main home. Unable to check on him themselves, they called local police and requested a welfare check. Police entered Johnny's apartment on April 19, 2022. Hours later, they called his parents with news that they'd found their son dead on the floor. According to officers, Johnny had experienced some sort of medical event that led to GI bleeding that ultimately claimed his life. Family suspicions. This made no sense to Johnny's family. He was only 38 years old and had just been given a clean bill of health after a full medical exam only 4 months prior. It was so unexpected that they even asked if there were signs of a struggle or evidence that he might have taken his own life. But they were assured there was no trauma, no drugs, and nothing suspicious found at the scene. As shocking as it was, his cause of death was entirely natural and had likely just been spurred by drinking and tobacco use. The horrifying discovery. 10 days after Johnny's body was discovered, his ex-girlfriend and her mother returned to his apartment to retrieve some of her belongings. She knew re-entering the space would be difficult, but there was no way she could have prepared for what awaited her inside. Blood was everywhere. It was pooled in bathrooms, wiped on doors, spread throughout the living space, and even found on chairs and banisters. But the most horrifying part was the walls. They were covered in splattered blood, revealing long, streaking handprints. It was something straight out of a horror movie. The security camera recording. The neighbor revealed they believed something far worse than a medical emergency had happened to Johnny because they had a security camera mounted on their door facing Johnny's unit. On the day of his passing, it captured something incredibly disturbing. The footage shows Johnny making his way up the stairs to his apartment around 3:03 p.m. Nothing seems out of the ordinary, though it's noteworthy he was holding an empty glass, perhaps suggesting he'd been drinking. But this doesn't seem to impair his movements much as he punches in the code and enters his home just like every other day. But moments later, something happens inside that unit, and while it goes unseen, it doesn't go unheard. "Oh dude, what the F? What are you doing? Yo, what the F asterisk dude? What are you doing, man?" The mystery man. The audio seems to depict a man yelling, repeatedly asking, "What are you doing?" and begging for something to stop. On top of this, you can hear loud thuds and banging, almost as if things were falling inside or there was some sort of physical altercation before the unit goes quiet just seconds later. It was unclear if this voice was Johnny's or perhaps someone else who'd been inside the unit. But regardless, one thing was apparent from this audio. There was someone else in that apartment despite the fact that Johnny lived alone. And just 7 minutes later, this unseen person would emerge. This clearly wasn't Johnny. After leaving the unit, the anonymous man nearly makes it out of the building before seeming to change his mind, turning around and walking back up the stairs before fiddling with the door handle, touching it only with his sleeve like he was wiping off fingerprints. The final cry for help. Just 1 minute later, you can hear Johnny shouting for help from inside the apartment. Moments after, he stops. No further sound or activity would come from Johnny's unit until police arrived 5 days later. The controversial investigation and conclusion. The man in the footage was eventually identified as Stephen Church. He claimed he'd been staying with Johnny for about 3 days while couch surfing. He said when Johnny came home, Johnny started drunkenly yelling at him about paying rent, which led to a verbal altercation. But he insisted this altercation never turned physical and he left immediately after. However, Steven's story doesn't really match what we hear in the video. From the footage, we can hear everything happening in that unit, but at no point do we hear any sort of argument, nor do we hear anything about rent, with the phrases lending themselves more to a physical struggle rather than a verbal one. In October 2022, Johnny's case was officially closed for good, with Steven cleared of any wrongdoing, as Johnny's death was labeled the same way it always had been, a medical emergency that couldn't be further elaborated on. The most relevant evidence being that Steven's shoe prints weren't found in the blood, but Johnny's were, implying he hadn't been part of the struggle. Tick-tock and the corpse, when fame matters more than humanity. The horrific discovery. Around 7:30 a.m. on a warm July morning in 2019, 17-year-old Bethany Martin and a 16-year-old friend decided to walk to a gas station near their home in San Antonio, Texas. As they made their way down the road, their path brought them parallel to a drainage ditch often filled with various trash and discarded material. But on this day, something far more interesting caught their eye. It looked like a man crouching down, leaning against one of the concrete walls. But the closer they got, the more they realized how unusual his posture was. He looked completely unnatural and wasn't moving. By the time they came face to face with him, reality hit them. They just found a dead body. The first tick-tock, fake shock. This discovery was traumatic enough for anyone, especially two teenagers. Upon calling police and being sent on their way, Bethany and her friend made the long walk home, contemplating what to do next before eventually landing on the idea of sharing their experience with the world. As soon as they got inside, they began setting up lights and cameras to film a tick-tock. The clip showed the two sitting on a couch appearing to be in shock with the words, "Us remembering we found a dead body this morning," plastered on screen, offering no other context aside from the description, which simply read, "I wish we were kidding. All respect to the family." The horrifying truth. But any doubt about this post's legitimacy would be quickly dispelled by a discovery made less than one full day later. As it was revealed, this recording hadn't actually been the only video these two girls had made on that fateful day. On their walk to the gas station, the girls had stumbled across the body of 25-year-old Marcus Adams, who had seemingly died earlier that morning, having apparently taken his own life. But upon finding Marcus, the girls weren't actually overwhelmed with sadness or shock. Instead, their focus immediately went to something far different, as something on the man's body had caught their attention. The despicable act. His necklace. The girls really liked it. In fact, the unnamed 16-year-old had said it matched her fashion perfectly. So before police arrived, the two would once again pull out their phone and start recording, showing Bethany approaching the body with her intention being to grab his necklace, which she eventually does, removing the medallion and giving it to her friend before tossing the chain into nearby grass. The 16-year-old then posted that video to her Snapchat story for all her close friends to see. The audio reveals they were clearly having fun doing this. "You got to do it now. Now or never. Here, hold me. I got it. I got it. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I got it. Oh my God, we're going." Legal consequences. Just one day after posting this TikTok, both girls were questioned by police after the incident, and the footage was reported to them. As a result, Bethany was charged with theft of a human corpse but would ultimately avoid any serious jail time. Meanwhile, the 16-year-old's name and charges were never publicly released, but we know the medallion was returned to the family. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Bethany later returned to her TikTok page shortly after her arrest to share her side of the story, giving a less than half-hearted apology while also claiming to be the victim, saying her friend had pressured her to steal from Marcus, as well as pressured her into making that TikTok in the first place, because she thought it would be a hit. Jonelle Matthews, 3 decades of mystery and deadly obsession. The night she vanished. On December 20, 1984, 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews disappeared from her home in Greeley, Colorado during evening hours. Jonelle had performed in her school's choir concert, which her parents were unable to attend as her mother was out of town, and her father had gone to her sister's basketball game nearby, leading to Jonelle catching a ride home with a friend. She was dropped off at her house around 8:15, where she excitedly spoke to her father on the phone, letting him know she'd arrived home safe and sound. Approximately 1 hour later, her father Jim Matthews pulled into the driveway to find the garage door wide open and the house completely empty. Jonelle was gone, leaving behind her winter coat and even her shoes despite it being a frigid, snowy night. Within that rapidly accumulating snow lay one of the only real clues left at the scene: footprints leading directly to one of the home's windows, suggesting someone had been watching Jonelle. Becoming an icon, her disappearance became a major news story almost immediately, with the entire community and really the entire country becoming invested in this girl's fate, thanks largely to her being one of the very first milk carton kids. This meant her face and information about her disappearance was shown on countless milk cartons across the country to spread the word. As a result, this case became huge in mainstream media, with even politicians beginning to take note of Jonelle's story, including then-President Ronald Reagan mentioning the girl in one of his speeches. 35 years of waiting. Eventually, the rise of the internet would start to play a key role in this case. Even in the late 2010s, over 3 decades after she'd vanished, her case was still being shared and discussed just as it had been 30 years prior, with it still being a point of contention for politicians as recently as 2019, when a man running for governor of Idaho mentioned her disappearance in a Facebook post 35 full years later. The body discovery. On Tuesday, July 23, 2019, at roughly 4:50 p.m., a crew digging in an isolated field in Weld County, Colorado to install a new pipeline uncovered the decayed remains of a little girl. It was Jonelle, still wearing the clothes she'd worn to her recital, meaning she'd likely died the very day she disappeared, having been killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. The suspect, Stephen Pankey. Almost immediately upon finding her body, police zeroed in on their suspect. The man's name was Stephen Pankey, and at the time of Jonelle's disappearance, he'd been living in the same general area in Colorado. But by 2019, Stephen had long since fled the area, eventually packing up seemingly out of the blue and moving to Idaho, where when Jonelle's body was discovered, he just happened to be running for governor. The bizarre Facebook post. During his campaign, Pankey had put out a bizarre Facebook post about Jonelle, calling for the Colorado DA to oversee a fresh investigation, as he stated local police had wrongly focused on the theory that Jonelle's disappearance was a child abduction and murder, which was quite convenient, as just a few months after posting this, he would be arrested for the abduction and murder of Jonelle Matthews. Circumstantial but compelling evidence. The evidence supporting this was mainly circumstantial, but incredibly concerning. Just one day after Jonelle's abduction, Pankey decided to take his wife to California to celebrate the holidays with his parents, with this trip being completely unplanned as his wife was only told about it literally the day of. Making things stranger when they returned home, Stephen's car conveniently caught fire and burned to a crisp, for which he offered no explanation, but in response, he took the car to a local scrapyard where it was further destroyed, taking any potential evidence with it. The strange obsession. But while all this was strange enough, police say the main indicator that Stephen was their man was his clear obsession with Jonelle's case. Shortly after the slaying, Stephen began listening to and watching any news reports he could on Jonelle's case, while also having his wife read every single article about the missing girl out loud, often having her repeat them over and over. His obsession didn't stop there. He then started frequently calling police, wanting to talk to them about the case, even going so far as to give them potential leads, claiming to be fearful he'd be blamed for the crime despite seemingly never having even met her. During some of these many unusual phone calls, he was said to have given details about her disappearance that were never actually made public. His obsession was entirely uncanny, bringing up her disappearance randomly even decades later, with his Facebook post being a perfect example. The implicit confession. One of Stephen's most incriminating statements came from something he mentioned in that infamous message. In it, Stephen said his son Carl had been murdered in 2008, which was true. The murder was actually fully solved, with it confirmed Stephen had nothing to do with it. But when he was mourning Carl's loss, something unusual happened. His now ex-wife recalled that following Carl's death, Panky never once cried until the day before his memorial service, where she watched him from a distance walk up to their son's urn and begin to sob, eventually blurting out, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." Justice at last. Despite maintaining his innocence to this day, Panky was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2040. His conviction came 12,634 days after Jonelle Matthews' disappearance, with Panky's cryptic Facebook post serving as a dark relic of his twisted obsession that would eventually expose him as Jonelle's killer.